Thank you for inviting me into your home. I want to tell you about a distinguished military gentleman who was asked his name by someone who had just met him at a reception. He said, "I'm Colonel Henry Davenport, DSO, MC, OBE." Well, he's rather taken aback with the response, "That's a funny way to spell Davenport." Well, my theme this morning is names, and I'm going to introduce it with a reading from St. John's Gospel. Jesus said, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." Then the Jews began to complain about him, because he said, "I am the bread of life that came down from heaven." They were saying, "Is not this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How can he now say, 'I have come down from heaven'?" Jesus answered them, "Do not complain among yourselves. No one can come to me unless drawn by my Father who sent me, and I'll raise him up at the last day. It is written in the prophets, 'They shall all be taught by God.' Everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. Not that anyone has seen the Father, except the one who is from God. He has seen the Father. Very truly I tell you, whoever believes has eternal life. I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate manna in the wilderness, and they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven, so that one may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats of this bread will live forever, and the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh." The following report appeared at the bottom of page 4 in the Evening News. 2 men were killed when their light aircraft crashed into a field only minutes after takeoff. Their names are being withheld until their relatives had been informed. The next day, the same incident had made its way to the front page, because the names of the men could be revealed, and they were all, both of them, well known. Names are important. It's the first thing that we learn about anyone when we meet them, and it's the one thing we try to remember about them afterwards. Knowing someone by name means that he or she is no longer a total stranger, and the merest mention of the name will call that person to mind. Well, I'm going to talk about names this morning, and my starting point is Moses and his determination to know God's name. It was when he had called by God to go to Egypt to rescue the Israelites from the clutches of Pharaoh, who had enslaved them. Moses knew that the Israelites, to whom he was a complete stranger, would never accept him as their leader unless he was able to tell them the name of the one who sent him. It was vital that Moses should know God's name, and God said to him, "Well, tell them that it was I am who sent you." Now, there's been a lot of speculation over the years as to why God's name should be I am. And the reason is, whereas some things may be no more than myths or legends, God is real. He actually exists. He existed before all things, and he exists above all things. He is, in truth, the great I am. The book of Revelation reinforces this when it tells us that God is the one who was and is to come. It's with all this in mind that we approach this morning's Gospel, in which Jesus says, "I am the bread of life." Now, this was a quite extraordinary claim for Jesus to make. He said that he was the I am who called Moses and who instructed Moses to rescue the Israelites from Egypt. He claimed, in a way that was clear to anyone who heard him say it, that he was the God of Israel and the Lord of heaven and earth. There are many people today who believe in God, but they think that he is utterly remote and incomprehensible, that he is so far removed from us that he is unable either to hear or to respond to our prayers. Against this, St. Paul assures us that because of Jesus, God is not far from any of us, that it is in him that we live and move and have our being. There are many today who would agree that Jesus was a good man, and he was the greatest teacher of all time. They would also admit that if anybody practiced, or everybody practiced what Jesus taught, it would be a much happier and peaceful world. But the writer and theologian C.S. Lewis insisted that everyone who believes this must also accept that Jesus is God. He said that if Jesus was not God, he was either a lunatic or a liar. And explained that if Jesus was both good and truthful, and also completely sane and rational, he must be God. He is the Lord of heaven and earth, the King of kings, the only ruler of princes. In saying, "I am the bread of life," Jesus shed more light upon his name and his identity. And later on in St. John's Gospel, Jesus enlarged further upon his name. He also said, "I am the light of the world. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. And finally, I am the way, the truth, and the life." There will be other times when we will be able to think about all those great names of Jesus. But this morning, our focus is upon Jesus, the bread of life. Now, he said this just after he had fed the 5,000, which was, of course, one of the best known and most spectacular of all the miracles of Jesus. And its most immediate result was to provoke a great number of people to follow him, at least initially, so they could obtain more bread. They regarded Jesus as being the dispenser of free bread, and they looked for no more from him than that. Well, they say there is no such thing as a free lunch. And those who followed Jesus merely looking for more bread were to discover the truth of that. Jesus was much more than a source of loaves and fishes, and he asked much more of us than merely to eat his food. Have you heard it said that we are what we eat? It's quite true that our bodies consist of the food we eat, and we have an obligation to feed the hungry and to do whatever we can for people who are starving for want of food, both in this country and overseas. But Jesus is the bread of life, and this relates to much more than our need for food and drink to sustain our lives. It has to do with our essential spiritual needs, both here and hereafter. An essential part of our service on Sundays is the confession and the absolution. It has been said that the things we have done and the things that we've left undone are what prevent us from eating the bread of life. And St. Gregory of Nyssa, one of the greatest saints of the Church, said, "The bread of life is the antidote for having eaten the forbidden fruit. Every time we see as he sees, think as he thinks, and love as he loves, we have feasted on the bread of life and tasted eternal life." To say that we are what we eat suggests that we are simply composed of, say, cornflakes and fish and chips and bacon and eggs. But we know that there's much more to us than that.